Aaron Morgenstern said, "All empires fall eventually. It is the way of things." As the world starts its multipolar journey, there are those in the West who argue that there is no global chaos, turmoil, discontent, and/or a rise of nationalism. The argument in the West, for instance, is that Russia's aggression is partly to blame for the reshaping of the geopolitical map of Europe and derailing cooperation between Moscow and the West for years to come. However, the same voices from the West refrained from stating the obvious and truth about the main causes that led to the Ukraine conflict in the first place. My name is Dr. David Waralu, and you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict. Our show today is sponsored by Noble Gold. In this video, I'm going to provide you an in-depth analysis about the 7 signs of the demise of an empire, with the US as a case in point. Using history as my guide, how could that be, I ask? Following the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991, former US Secretary of State James Baker spoke in the magnificent St. Catherine Hall at the Kremlin, saying that Western leaders contemplated, and I put this in quote, "no extension of NATO jurisdiction for forces of NATO 1 inch to the east," end of quote. Interestingly, the now declassified negotiation documents show that for former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev to agree to NATO membership for newly unified Germany, he made it quite clear that, and I put this in quote, "any extension of the zone of NATO is unacceptable," end of quote. What the West did not expect is the resolve Russia displayed as it intensifies its military operations in Ukraine, leading many to speculate whether Ukraine has become a failed state. Throughout the history of the world, there have been different dynasties and empires. These dynasties rise for different reasons and are of different sizes. Typically, a dynasty has its start on some sort of hereditary leadership based on family, power, or religiosity of the leader. Other times, it could be by consensus of the nationality or ethnicity, and over time, land is captured and the population rises. In some instances, major minorities in the area are absorbed, and at other times, semi-autonomous regions are created. We can name empires such as the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Ottomans, Austro-Hungarian or Austrian, British, Napoleon, Russians, even the short-lived Second Reich, the German Empire, all of which had a humble beginning and then rose to a world superpower. Now from our sponsor Noble Gold, a big thank you to them. Because of them, this show is possible. Just as King Charles III of Britain has a crown with the timeless wealth of gold, you can enrich your future with the enduring value of a gold IRA. Like those precious crowns, a gold IRA doesn't tarnish over time. It shines brighter in economic turmoil. It's a hedge against inflation and stability in volatile markets. This month, the first solid 1/4 ounce gold standard bullion coin ever issued with Charles III's image can be yours with your own qualifying gold IRA or a 401k rollover of $50,000 or higher. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold investments. Hurry and go to geopoliticsgold.com to secure your wealth. Remember, there is always risk in investments and there are no guarantees of any kind. Now, back to our show. Looking at world superpowers, we see certainly aspects in their demise. The one thing we find from history is that all empires, governments, countries, nation-states rise and fall. It doesn't matter who they are, their reason for creation, or their ideology, All of them have a time of rise and progress. Then they get stronger and more powerful. Then they reach a summit. They become the most powerful, influential, and advanced as they will be. This rise might take centuries. At other times, the circumstances are right, and in a few decades, they are invincible. Next, there is a time of social and state consistency. The time of, I put this in quote, Pax Romana. This time could last for centuries or decades, or in some cases, just several years. However, regardless of power, ideology, or wealth, they all begin to fall. It's inevitable. And by the way, all try to convince their population it won't happen to them, and it's because God, however you perceive him or her to be, is on their side. As I've said, all empires fall, and for the same reasons. Some will argue with this, but history seems to bear this out. As always, some will say that this won't happen to our country. We are different, or there has never been a country like us, or because of a race, religion, creed, or something like that. It all sounds good, but it doesn't matter. They all fall. Here are the 7 signs. First, they became fixated on some form of ideology or mix of ideologies. This can be religion, economics, societal, centralized or decentralized, and of course, politics. It can run its course from jingoism to cosmopolitanism, from condemning others or raising one to supersede the ideals of the state. Over time, this ideology or ideologies become part of the societal construct of national identity. It begins to divide people into who belongs and who doesn't belong. As a result, the beginning of domestic social division. Second is the superiority of amusement. During the Roman time, it was called moral decline, but that is just a small contributing factor. By far, it was, and I put it in quote here, bread and circuses, and the quote of the masses that helped bring about its demise. Along with this was the lack of emphasis on education and training. During this time, citizenry became more interested in being happy than to see what was going on around them. They became more involved in amusing themselves with the pleasures of the empire and becoming less connected to involvement in their duties as citizens of their country. They followed whoever gave them a sense of protection and false sense of safety and played into their pleasure and wants regardless of the consequences. One example of this is the need for mercenaries. Citizens less and less filled the ranks of the military, and the government used mercenaries to do the job the citizen army no longer did. Some of the ranks of these mercenaries were ex-enemies of the empire, and all of them were paid better and treated better than the troops. We see similar circumstances with the Ostrogoths of the Romans and the Yayas of the Ottomans. Third, government corruption. This can come in many forms, although it seems typically a combination of some mixture of oligarch, plutocrats, and kleptocrats taking control of the government. It doesn't matter the type of government either. They can be democratic with the parliament, an autocratic monarchy, or a combination of political economic union of governing. Regardless of the type of government, the overall effect is that the rich, powerful, and their associates acquire more wealth and power, while the poor and ignorant become locked in a vicious cycle. When this occurs, the underprivileged have nothing to lose if they revolt literally or figuratively. Fourth, degrading public health. This can come in the form of plagues, diseases, substance addiction, abuses, and unintentional societal poisoning. It's not that this can happen to many different societies. It's the failure of society to address the problem. In some societies, this takes the form of pandemics, such as plagues and social diseases. At other times, it could be poisoning through ignorance, such as with the lead pipes of Rome or the nuclear testing and the spread of cancer across different parts of the United States and the former Soviet Union. In fact, some could even point to the EPA's Superfund sites or events such as Love Canal and Flint, Michigan as examples. Then there are the problems of widespread drugs abuse and addiction, from the opium that destroyed China and caused the opium wars to the current heroin epidemic in the Western Hemisphere and the failure of battlers with the drug cartels of Central America. The fifth, one could be considered nutritional challenges and stratification. This can come about for several reasons. It can be caused by exhaustion of the soil from over-farming, drought, flood, or even over-irrigation. Hurricanes, and in some parts of the world, tornadoes can also cause havoc for farming on land or in the sea. The result is food challenges for the population, and of course, along with this, the stratification of the haves and the have-not. Added pressure such as this can intensify the burdens on society and the government, which are trying to control or manage the situation. Worse yet, if the governing authorities do nothing and let the lower class suffer, ferment, and die. Overexpansion, along with jingoism or even nationalism, makes up aspects of the sixth sign. The regime becomes overextended and over-involved in the world. In fact, they strive for hegemony over their neighbors and promote fear over their enemies. We can look historically at empires from Assyria to Persia to the Ottoman empires to the former Soviet Union, of course. Let's not forget the US manifest destiny and the US hegemony over Cuba and its creation of colonies in the Pacific. This ever-increasing empire, either physically or economically, takes its toll on the population and constantly involves more and more of the government priorities to control its possessions. Massive amounts of government wealth go towards control and propping up of territories militarily. This money all comes at the expense of infrastructure, the hindrance of research and development, and limiting the betterment and expansion of education. The last and seventh sign is the constant feeling of perpetual external warfare against the nation state. For the Assyrian, it was the Medes and the Chaldeans with the Hittites mixed in. For Rome, it was the German invasions. For the German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, the Great War was the culprit. Overexpansion and the need to control your interest requires constant conflict. Populations lose their incentives to plan for the future when they don't know what the future might be or who may invade it. This can make the lasting impact on a country. When we think of the first industrial revolution, we think of Great Britain, or as Napoleon said, and I put it in quote, a nation of shopkeepers, end of quote. But why didn't the Industrial Revolution begin in France? It had the Napoleonic Code with the free contract, open markets, and clean uniform regulations. The government had standardized weights and measures, even establishing technical schools. There was a centralized Bank of France and encouragement of investors and inventions which were publicly honored. So why Great Britain instead of France? France had years of wars which brought about heavy debt, high unemployment in some sectors of the economy, and in some regions of the country was limited in development. Also, the returning soldiers created economic and social problems in some sections of the country. When a regime is constantly experiencing warfare or some form of constant warfare, it cannot use its time, talent, and resources to move forward. It will eventually harm society overall. Here is my conclusion for you. Nations, regimes, countries all suffer from this situation. 1, 2, or 3 of these signs doesn't matter to a superpower. But when they all come into alignment, when they all occur, then the result seems inevitable. All empire, no matter how strong, powerful, or unique, will eventually fall. As always, prepare yourself for changing the world order. Till next time.